weeks, we've been talking about tips and tricks for habit formation, how to make sure that we have all the resources we need to make sure that we're able to implement the habits and routines that we need to live a healthy lifestyle. And so changing gears today on this one and talking about trauma. And this is something I'd actually promised to speak about a few months ago and kind of shied away from, to be honest with you, feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome up here being live and on the camera talking about this, because it's not something that I have a lot of experience with personally. I'm very fortunate, very blessed to have grown up in a loving and supportive environment and had lots of support and resources available to me as I was making my way through life and developing and growing. And so this thought of not having a safe and comforting environment of growing up and the effects physically and chemically that can have on the body is not something that I have a ton of firsthand experience with. And so all the same, I feel this is a really important message that just needs to be shared. It's not quite at the level where it needs to be. And I don't think it's quite understood how prevalent trauma can be in our community, in our environment, in our day-to-day lives. And so really just felt compelled to come and share with you guys today to make sure that this message got out there in the best way it can. So again, not a medical doctor, not a psychologist, so there's no medical advice in this discussion. Just want to share my thoughts and opinions with you guys, and hopefully it resonates in some meaningful and powerful way. So the basis of my conversation today is The Body Keeps Score, beautiful, powerful book by Bessel van der Kolk, psychologist for over 30 years of experience, specifically working with patients who have experienced trauma in some capacity in their life. And so I think before we jump into some of those physical and chemical, changes to their biology, to the immune system that occurs with trauma, let's really quickly define what trauma is. And so that we can have hopefully a more informed and meaningful conversation. So in Bessel's book, he boils it down to a really simple and in some ways vague definition that trauma is unbearable and intolerable. And that is, I think, intentionally vague on his point, because it creates the space to create the space for any opportunity for any event to be traumatic. And I think this is so important, right? Because I'm going to talk about big T trauma and little t trauma. So the idea of really extreme cases of trauma, I think that we'd all appreciate as being traumatic, things that if you walked into a psychologist or a doctor's office, you not only have a medical diagnosis for it, but you probably even have some kind of medication or treatment intervention prescribed to you because it's understood that what you experienced was terrible and traumatizing and needs support and guidance. But then there's also little t trauma as well, things that I think are a little bit more insidious in the sense that they just kind of are there day after day after day, and they affect our ability to feel safe and to feel comfortable in our environment. And so a lot of cases, maybe we have a safe home environment, but then we go off to school or we go off to work and there's somebody or something there that makes us feel vulnerable, that makes us feel threatened, that makes us feel unsafe. And over time, that again can have manifest itself in the same physical chemical responses as I'm talking about with the bigger traumatic events. And so I struggle with this a little bit because I didn't want to start trying to sound like I was comparing one type of trauma to another, because at the end of the day, everybody responds differently to the events in their lives. And so if the person who experienced the event feels that it was traumatic for them, I think we need to respect and honor that and make sure that they have the support and the guidance they need to get themselves to a place where they feel safe and loved and cared for, regardless of what that is. And so it's really apples to oranges in that sense. There's no way to compare one person's experience to another. And so we just need to appreciate that. But so to be clear here, when we're talking about big T trauma is what I'm going to call the more obvious ones that people will think of probably when they think of trauma. We can talk about sexual abuse, rape. We can talk about physical violence, whether that's something that happened specifically to you or something that you witnessed as a child. So maybe a friend or family member that was assaulted in your presence. This could be something from the community, right? So we're talking about gang violence. Maybe you grew up in a neighborhood where there's a little bit of political instability, and so there was fighting going on in the streets for that reason. Or maybe you volunteered as a veteran or as a soldier, and served and experienced the cruel and harsh environment of war and served to kind of keep us safe and make us feel and create this environment that we have in Canada where we're safe and free. And all of those things, I think we obviously understand have their traumatic impact on our body. But what about some of the little t traumas as well? And so maybe this is as simple as having an idea of something that you want to pursue or explore. Then your network, your community kind of says, no, that's dumb, or that's stupid, or what a waste of time, or what a dumb idea. Like, you shouldn't waste your time doing that. All of a sudden you don't feel safe and comfortable exploring this idea that's part of who you maybe want to be. Maybe it's a certain skill set or a certain career path, and it's not supported or not valued. that can be painful. Obviously, that's a little bit more on the lower end of skills on the scale, but still relevant. Or, again, you have a safe home environment, but then when you go out to school, you're being bullied, whether it's verbally, physically, sexually, by somebody at school or when you go to work. And again, that is worth a lot of cases. Those victims of those experiences don't speak up and don't share, and so we kind of sweep that under the rug. But I think it's important to appreciate that this is happening every single day. The stats are very clear that as much as 1 in 4 of adults have experienced either themselves firsthand or know a family member that's experienced some kind of abuse or some kind of trauma in some way in their lives. And so we have to appreciate that this is happening on a regularly occurring basis. And like I said, if somebody's experienced it as traumatic, then we need to appreciate that and make sure they have the resources and the support they need to be able to move forward. And so let's jump into, now that we've kind of cleared up what we're talking about with trauma, let's kind of jump into some of these physical and chemical changes, why it's so hard after experiencing a traumatic event to be able to move forward and to integrate. I think for potential when you haven't experienced that in your life to say, oh, why don't you just get over it? Why don't you move on? And there's a lot of clear, at this point in 2020, a lot of clear evidence about this. The research has been done that shows that there's actual changes to the brain structure. There's actual changes to our physiology, to our biology, to our immune system that inhibits us from integrating in a meaningful way. So when we're unable to feel safe and valued with others, when we're unable to have that love, to feel valued and seen and have that reciprocated from the people in our lives, it has a change to our body that we need support and guidance to work our way through and get back to kind of a more homeostatic or balanced state of being. And so this actually goes all the way back to 1872. Charles Darwin, the man who originally wrote about evolution, also had his thoughts on emotions and how different experiences can affect our body. And so here we go. This is a quote from Charles Darwin in the book. He says, "Behaviors to avoid or escape from danger have clearly evolved to render each organism competitive in terms of survival. But inappropriately prolonged escape or avoidance behavior would put the animal at a disadvantage, in that successful species preservation demands reproduction, which in turn depends upon feeding, shelter, and mating activities, all of which are reciprocals of avoidance and escape." So that's the end of Darwin's quote, and I'm just going to read you a little bit of what Dr. Van de Kalk says as well. So in other words, if an organism is stuck in survival mode, its energies are focused on fighting off unseen enemies, which leaves no room for nurture, care, and love. For us humans, it means that as long as the mind is defending itself against invisible assaults, our closest bonds are threatened, along with our ability to imagine, to plan, to play, to learn, and to pay attention to other people's needs. And so I think that does a lot to kind of set the groundwork here. There's really, this boils down to our autonomic nervous system. So we have the sympathetic nervous system, so our fight or flight response when we perceive violence or when we perceive a threat. And so at that point, then we have increased stress hormone, we have increased heart rate, we have increased blood pressure, all of these things. And then the balance of that is the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is responsible for feeding, for shelter, for mating, for digestion, for all of the kind of calming and soothing things. And we actually have direct control over the system through our breathing. So when we inhale, that increases our heart rate, increases our blood pressure, kind of stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. And then on exhaling, we're able to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, the PNS, and that allows our heart rate to decrease, allows our blood pressure to settle, and allows ourselves to calm down. And so that is a very obvious thing that you can practice and try right now to experience the two different sides. But here's the deal is like I said, we need to have that feeling of safe around others. We need an environment where we feel cared for, feel safe, feel protected, feel that we can be ourselves. And so when that's not the case, there's 3 levels of safety that tie into this autonomic nervous system, 3 responses that the body has to trauma. The first one is a social engagement. So this one is part of the VVC, and we'll just keep it acronyms today because it doesn't need to be any more detailed than that. But the VVC is activated when we feel this sense of social engagement, social cohesion. So somebody smiles at us and we smile back. Somebody gives us a hug and we feel loved and supported and valued. Immediately when we experience a traumatic experience where we feel threatened, where we feel vulnerable, where we feel like we may not be safe, the body immediately has an impact and starts to turn off the VVC and turns on the DVC, which is kind of the more fight or flight. And then in an extreme sense, extreme case, it can be freezing or collapsing. And so that VVC is turned off. We no longer feel safe. We no longer feel loved, supported, valued. And so we're going to call for help. And if nothing comes, then that's when that fight or flight response kicks in. If we realize that we're on our own and there's nobody coming to support us, then the blood pressure increases, the cortisol spikes, the heart rate increases, blood pressure spikes, all of those things occur. And so that's your sympathetic nervous system. And so somebody that's experienced trauma may have this be their trigger, their cue. When they experience something that triggers that traumatic event again in their life, all of a sudden they feel that stress, that anxiety kicking in right away. And so you overreact to a very simple response, is because it's been programmed into your body to turn off that VVC and have this fight or flight response kick in. And so it's not something you're choosing to doing. They're not choosing to fly off the handles or be really anxious or angry or afraid. It's something that's actually been programmed into their body from this previous experience. And now in a lot of cases as well, especially when we're talking about youth or childhood trauma, there's not an opportunity to fight or to flee. You're stuck in the experience. In a lot of cases, right, if this is occurring in the home, then you're dependent on these individuals for your security and your safety. And so there's nowhere for you to go. You have to stay, or you feel you have to stay to and survive in whatever way you can. And so that's when this DVC ramps up even further, and you get the freeze or collapse response, which is where your body literally just shuts down. In a lot of cases in this experience, people are maybe unable even to perceive pain. So just totally, it completely shuts down. And this is the body's most basic, most foundational attempt at survival. If there's no opportunity to fight or flee and they call for help and nobody's coming to help them, then you just totally shut down and wait for the event to pass and to move on, kind of thing. And that ultimately, I think, is what we see a lot in people that have experienced trauma, right? Is just this detachment from day-to-day life or being triggered by certain events and then having this huge spike, this huge response in either fear or anger or frustration or whatever it may be. But one of those two events occur. Either we shut down and turn off, or we get overly stimulated by the event. And it's not something that we're choosing to do, or not something that the individual is choosing to do. In either case, it's something that's been programmed biologically from this experience of trauma. And obviously, the more frequently it occurs, or the more intense the traumatic event in question was, then the more likelihood that you're going to see a more severe response in that way from those safety mechanisms. So shutting off of that sense of community, sense of connection, sense of safety and security, and more in line with feeling vulnerable, feeling weak, feeling unable to connect. And so lots that can be done to support individuals in that type of situation. That's what I'm going to get into over the next 5 weeks. We're going to do a little bit more biology next week, and then we've got 4 weeks about different treatment interventions that can be done really simply from home. And obviously, if you know either yourself or you know somebody that fits into this category of having experienced a traumatic event, then again, not a medical professional and not a doctor, and so recommending that they go and get the help and the support that they need. But some suggestions of different venues of what that may look like, things that we maybe haven't heard about or appreciated other than talk therapy or medications that can help integrate, connect ourselves with our physical body, with our emotions, and so that we're better able to integrate that trauma into our lives and move forward and have a meaningful and purposeful life, and not be defined by that trauma that happened at some point in the past. So that was a lot. Hopefully that was able to make sense. Human beings are very social animals. We need to feel connected. We need to feel valued. We need to feel safe and supported by those around us. And so when we don't have that sense of safety, that sense of trust, that sense of security, and it's compromised in some way through some either big T or little t trauma, then it has a lasting impact on the body. Our physical nervous system is changed in such a way that we're not unable to respond to normal day-to-day events in a way in the preferred manner. You either get that shutdown or you get that extreme response, and they're programmed so there's changes to the biological system to encourage those things to happen. So getting the support and the care that you need in those types of situations is absolutely invaluable to be able to integrate and move forward and have a more have an opportunity to overcome the negative effects that occurred from the traumatic event. So not the brightest and lightest topics today, but something, like I said, that I felt just so valuable and so important that had to be shared, because I think in a lot of cases it's still so taboo to talk about mental health, to talk about trauma, and the fact that we've all probably experienced or know somebody that's experienced in some way, and that it can have an actual impact on our body and how we react in the world, and getting the care and support we need is the best way to move forward in our lives. So thank you guys as always for your time and attention. We'll see you back here, same time, same place, 2:00 on Wednesday, to continue on with the next part in this trauma series. So take care.